I'm going to name drop. Over 10 years ago, I was assisting for Martin Pullen, and it was during the time he was remixing and remastering Deep Purple's 40th anniversary Made in Japan album. As all classic remasters and re-releases go, they come under incredible scrutiny from audiophiles and lifetime fans. Fortunately, for this anniversary release, the Sonics were praised. And why were they praised? Was it because of the high-grade tools we used for this project? No, it was because of Martin's skills. See, when I first began interning for Martin, he had great software resources, a great analog Focusrite Blue mastering suite, which he used, but what really impressed me was, in sessions, he'd pull up EQ6S, which is the stock EQ in Pro Tools. And it wasn't uncommon, and even on this project, he certainly used the EQ6S. That's right, no fancy features or gimmicks, just pure, unadulterated audio engineering, using their ears and making the right moves. Now, that's really cool. It's the stock plugin in Pro Tools. It begs the question, is the EQ6S mastering grade? Now, if you go to the sales page of any new plugin hitting the market and believed every word that was persuading you to buy that new shiny plugin, you'd think otherwise. So let's start there. Those big words, mastering grade and mastering quality. In the analog world, mastering grade was simpler to quantify. Low noise, low distortion, and switch dials with fixed resistors for accurate stereo tracking and recallability. But in the digital age, it's not that simple. Noise and recallability are no longer major issues, and distortion is more often a byproduct of programmed function than the nature in the limitations of the technology. So how do we quantify in the digital world what's actually suited for mastering and what's just a marketing gimmick? Today, I'm going to look at equalizers, compressors, and limiters, then share my perspectives as a mastering engineer on the parameter set, options in the market, comparisons to stock plugin. I'm going to do some tests to really hear if there's a gap or if there's any gap at all. But before we dive in, I have a little favor to ask. Please smash the subscribe button for future videos and click the link below to subscribe to my newsletter. It's packed with exclusive behind the scenes articles, research, and deep dives straight from my work here in the studio. So let's get started with EQs for mastering. Hand downs on a base level, we're looking at parametric EQs. For parametric EQs, I like to see the following. The ability to not only process the stereo channel, but also the mid, side, left, or right channels separately from one another. Have the option to use linear phase mode, and at a minimum should have the following curves: bells, notches, shelves, and pass filters. As a bonus, it's nice to have tilt curves, dynamic EQs, proportionate cues, and to be able to independently control the phase settings of individual bands. Now, per phase band control is something that's found on DMG Equilibrium and Ozone 10, where you can set the phase of various bands independently from one another, which makes it great for processing mid-side and left-right at the same time when you want to use a linear phase for coherent stereo imaging on the mid-side processing and minimum phase on the left-right in the low frequencies to prevent pre-ringing. The reality is, of all these features I've told you about, 95% of the time I'm mastering, I'm only ever using bells or high and low shelves. The times when I need to access mid-side information, linear phase mode, alternate curves, dynamic EQs, or per band phase is that 5% of the time I'm thrown a curveball and need to manage some minute detail that can't be fixed in the mix or has slipped through the cracks in the production stages. So what I want to do is show you some curves in Plugin Doctor, even the phase curves, and also have a null test with the high pass filters between EQ6S, which is the stock one, and FabFilter Pro Q3. So here in Plugin Doctor, I've got two matched curves here between, this is just the stock Apple EQ, AU parametric, which I think is like in their video editing software, which is just a stock one, and this is the Ozone parametric equalizer. Same Q values and boost. Let's look at the phase. They both track exactly the same, and I can show you that because I can move the phase here of the second signal. Exactly the same. Now, I've got a null test here where I've got Pro Q3 set with the high pass filter. And the reason why I used a high pass filter and not a bell curve is because the curvature of the bell curve on Pro Q3 runs to the square value of 1.4. See, the square root of 2 is 1.4, and that's what the value is that you use here with the Q values. But the Q factors here are the squared value of the square root. It's really weird, but anyway, that's not the point. I use this because it was a fair comparison. It doesn't completely null at bell curves, but it's so low and indistinguishable it'd be hard to pick out. But just take a look at this. These are the two ones null tested against each other. Have a look, and we'll open inside up. There's barely any signal there. Nothing. If I turn the phase, we're going to get a big boost.
Golden up patties, golden up patties.
but they're nothing. Even when there's bass, it's barely anything. It's just hairs of fractions there.
Taking paper space down, mate.
It nulls. The high pass filters null. And mainly even the bell curves null very close. So if I put this into a bell curve, there we are there, it's at 2. And then if I go here and turn that into a bell, let's go 2 at 2. It doesn't perfectly null, but it gets pretty damn close. Let's just open this up here. You know, negative 70 decibels of difference. Very hard to distinguish if you were going to blind A/B these. So basically what I'm saying is for the general function, bells, curves, shells, digital EQ, parametric EQ, you're not going to get a whole much more going to Pro Q3. Now, if you're a producer mastering your own productions, guess what? The stock EQ is perfect because any instances where you need to use other features could easily be negated by simply just going back to your old mix and making the appropriate adjustments. However, if you're looking to get into mastering, you won't always have that luxury as an engineer, in which case it's my opinion that you should explore spending money on one of the other 4 options. Now, what I've got here is a table of my 4 options I'd recommend for mastering. There's EQ 6S, which is the stock plugin or anybody's stock plugin, FabFilter Pro Q3, Ozone 10 EQ, the DMG Equilibrium, and the Kirchhoff EQ. Now, they're all at different price points. The one thing I would mention is that the Ozone 10 EQ, even though it's $250, that's actually Ozone 10 standard, so you get their whole suite with their limiter and everything, so it's relatively good value. I've got both the 10 and the Pro Q3 for different reasons, and you know, that's just my advice. If you're a producer, you don't really need to be spending extra money on this. You can solve issues in your production and your mix, but if you're going to be mastering, it's worth spending the money here on getting a dedicated EQ with those feature sets. The next thing we're going to be looking at are compressors. Must-haves are variable attack and release times from 0 to 250 milliseconds and up, variable ratios from 1.1 to 1 ratio and up, adjustable knees, a variable sidechain to control how much low end affects the processor and the slope of that processing. The bonus features on a compressor could be EQ shaping of the sidechain signal and mid-side mode. Now, of these compressors, I have the stock compressor, TDR Katalnikov, and Pro C2. However, for viewers of the channel, you know I use the TDR Katalnikov religiously. Even though the paid one has incredible additional feature sets, 99% of the time I'm using TDR Katalnikov, and the main reason I'm using this, even though it's really close to the stock one, is because I can monitor the delta signals to help refine my attack and release times, as well as the high pass sidechain filter. I can adjust the slope of it very accurately and the exact frequency I need. Now, that said, you're a producer, the stock compressors have an incredible feature set in most stores for mastering, especially Ableton. The compressor in Ableton is incredibly featured. Now, if you're a mastering engineer, what should you get? Well, I use TDR Katalnikov and it's free. You don't need to spend lots of money on other compressors. That all said, I see the value set they offer. However, just in my experience, those extra parameters and tweaks you can make rarely ever get used. Now, it's also on the flip side, even though I haven't done objective testing on this, I feel like those other compressors sound better than the stock ones. That's an opinion, not a fact. But that said, spending a few $100s on these other compressors is not going to be a game changer for the average producer or mixer's workflow. So that's why I just say stick with the stock one or get TDR Katalnikov because you can do an incredible job with them. Now, clippers are an interesting one, and a video I strongly recommend checking out is this one here by Raytown Productions on clippers. I've got a link to that in the description below. Now see, Submission Audio released a clipper, Flatline, with all the marketing prowess of mastering grade. But with thorough analysis, at least in hard clip mode, Raytown comes to some very conclusive evidence that free clip, yes, a free clipper offered the best performance in regards to least artifacts introduced when oversampling. And it goes to proving the point that sometimes marketing is just BS. Now, myself, what do I use? Well, I don't use free clip, not because it's a bad clipper, it's because I use standard clip, simply because of its graphical user interface. It is $25, so I don't think it's super exorbitant, but it's more a workflow thing for me in terms of the GUI, just being able to set the ins and outs the way I like it. So whether you're a producer, mixing engineer, mastering engineer, I don't really recommend wasting money on clippers. I don't care what people say, just don't waste money on them. Get free clip, and if you really want to splurge, standard clip's a good option for $25. Finally, now we're at it, limiters. And they're an interesting one to make comparison of because it's really hard to make a like-for-like comparison on limiters. It's an arms race of the algorithms and technology to squeeze the most out of a waveform as transparently as possible. At a base set though, limiters for mastering need oversampling and true peak limiting. The real difference in their toolset as limiters is how they manage getting from A to B. See, FabFilter Pro L2 works in two stages. The first stage is the attack module, which acts as a time gate for the clipping, and a second stage is the release stage for the limiter. In addition to that, there's a lot of user interaction between the look-ahead times and mode. You compare that to Ozone Maximizer, which internally oversamples and provides less autonomy over the parameter set, and that's done in place of their patented IRC, Intelligent Release Control. That IRC pattern creates a set of 8 envelopes and measures the distortion of the delta signal against psychoacoustic modeling to determine which envelope at any given time will provide the most transparent or suited response to the character in which you dial in. I've got a whole video going through that pattern if you want to actually understand how the IRC algorithm works. Then you've got Pro Tools Maxim, which has no oversampling and no true peak limiting. To be honest, there's no stock limiter I've ever heard that gets close to a Pro L2 or Ozone Maximizer. Now here's an AB of 10 decibels pushing into Maxim and 10 decibels pushing into Pro L2. Now, whether you're a producer, mixing engineer, or mastering engineer, here's where I'd recommend spending money on getting something like FabFilter Pro L2 or Ozone Maximizer. If you want something that's relatively more set and forget, I'd get Ozone Maximizer. If you want something that you can fiddle around with a little bit more and tweak, FabFilter Pro L2. So back around to that word mastering grade, it's super ambiguous. Something like Flatline, which is less transparent than a free alternative called Free Clip, it appears as blatant marketing jargon, whereas a tool like the Amek compressor by Plugin Alliance with an extensive feature set suited to stereo processing for mastering, it feels like a fair descriptor. Ultimately, to not waste money next time you're considering a new tool, put things into perspective and ask, how does this tool objectively and measurably help me do my work better, more effectively, or more efficiently? I hope this helped answer a bit behind what I consider worthwhile spending money on, and I really encourage you, go check out the IRC video on the Maximizer. It's wild. If you're really technically inclined, you're going to enjoy it. I'll leave a link in the description below. Until next time, take care.